being competitive, being able to speak well, that has nothing to do with your major. That has nothing to do with what you do in undergrad. What it has to do with is what kind of person you become. So I looked for that. I looked for the human being and what they could be, not what they already were, or what they studied. What can this person be? Where can they get to? And that's kind of how I evaluated talent.
Hi, I'm Nick Warner. As a dad, a lucky husband, and as a business coach, I value people and relationships above all else. But next is winning, sustainability, and healthy culture. I've been a business owner for 25 years and served for decades as a special advisor to business and government leaders at all levels. Let's just say I've seen some stuff. My passion and my expertise are helping motivated professionals and businesses find the highest level confluence of what they want in life and business. This is what it feels like to be together at the top. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my sponsors, Scholes Brick & Rogaski, OM Incorporated, Three Bridges Consulting, and Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips Travel. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Enjoy the show. Dennis Williams is the co-founder of Three Bridges Consulting, a successful sales and marketing firm specializing in using the power of video to sell. Dennis made the incongruent move from 10 years in front of the camera as a sports anchor for CBS in Buffalo, New York, to becoming head of sales and marketing for ABC 10 in California. And these are no small news organizations. Rather, they are owned by the Fortune 500 Tegna Company, which owns 64 news brands in 51 U.S. cities. Big corporate with big pressure to sell commercials and airtime. In this episode, Dennis Williams gets into the weeds about career change and ascension, sales, building sales teams, when family matters impact your work life, lots of sales tips, and more. Dennis Williams, where are you? And say hello to the people of Together at the Top.
Hello, Nick. I am in Delray Beach, Florida. I know it's never clear where exactly I am because I travel a lot these days, but yeah, I'm in Delray Beach, Florida, and ready to rock and roll and talk about some stuff.
I love it. Thanks for being with us. I got to tell you, I have had more fun and more substance preparing for this interview, so I have a lot. And I just want to pick at all the good stuff in between your ears. So here we go. I want to start with field promotions. And field promotions, for anybody who might be listening, or for our listeners, it could be construction, computer programming, a lawyer, a reporter who all of a sudden now went from the field for whatever their chosen field was to now business opportunity. One of the things you told me in pre-production that really caught my attention was a lot of folks can't make the transition because they're soft and pampered, in your words. Tell us about your experience in field promotions.
You're going right for the jugular for all my former colleagues. That's dangerous for me. Okay. No, what I mean by that is, a lot of people in broadcast journalism, and just to clear up what I was doing, I was a pregame host for the Buffalo Sabres, and I was a reporter and anchor at the CBS station in Buffalo. So anybody who doesn't know, the younger people might not remember, it was basically a news reporter, newscaster, broadcast journalist. So that was the story. A lot of those people are like, they sit at their anchor desk and they are anchorman, or, they are Ron Burgundy, if you will. So that's the extreme of it. So that there's this feeling that you're soft and you can't transition into a different world if that's what all you do is broadcast journalism. But I would argue that journalists are some of the best talent in the business world that I've seen, certain ones that are really good at it, because they're what my company is, which is curious, creative, and competitive, right? That's the three mantras that I've always stood by with Three Bridges, is that we want people that are curious, creative, and competitive. And that's what a really good journalist has, those three characteristics. And if you put those three characteristics together, Nick, they're pretty good at translating into the business world.
All right, good point. So good for everybody else. Tell us about your experience coming from the field or coming from an anchor desk into now business responsibility. Because as I understand your career, you went from the field to all of a sudden having budget responsibility, sales responsibility. In fact, there's a quote from the Buffalo News you're going to love. Buffalo News reported right after you went from the desk to the business office, quote, "Of course, Williams isn't completely off television. His voice and face, which remains boyish, are still on display in the commercials he sells to his clients," close quote. So tell us about your experience.
Well, I was very fortunate because when I went off the air in Buffalo, I had a soft landing into sales. So I wasn't a manager right away. I was basically an account executive at the NBC station, which was owned by Tegna. but I was also still doing a radio show. So people in town knew me. So I always like to say I was able to get a meeting, but people don't give their friends money unless they're going to provide value. So my sales career, I was able to get my foot in the door, but I still had to do a good job of selling the TV ads, selling the creative, selling the opportunity for the clients that were going to buy TV or radio, right? So I still had to kind of create my story and how I was going to get them to see the value in putting their brand or their product on TV. So while I could get a meeting probably better, I admit I had a soft land. I could get a meeting better than most because I was also able to offer my, voiceover or my ability to maybe even produce the commercial. Those really helped me. I always like to say, though, your friends don't just give you money, advertising dollars just to give it to you. It's not a donation. They still have to see, you still have to sell them on the value of the product. So that's what really got me into the business world. And I would say what has set me apart in that career was the fact that I was a journalist, that I could walk into a business and I could ask the right questions. I could be inquisitive and curious about their business. I wasn't just trying to sell. I really wanted to understand the level of their business and what they needed to accomplish. So the curiosity of a journalist translated into the sales world is something that I found very effective. And then you also add the creativity of it so that you could say to yourself, okay, there's their story. How do I tell this story? That helped me too. I felt like I could take the information they gave me, take that journalism background and tell their story to a specific audience, which is essentially what a journalist does, right? You're just crafting a story for an audience. And I was just able to translate that over to the business world.
So in those first 2 years of sales, for example, what were you good at? I guess you gave us some foreshadowing to what you were good at was the telling the story part. What did you suck at and how did you attack those parts?
I sucked at cold calling. I hated calling people like I didn't know. I was really bad at it. So I actually fashioned something. This was like the beginning of social media, and when LinkedIn was first starting. And I'm sure other people use this term, but I would use the term like, I really kind of only want warm leads. I don't want cold leads. And what happened was I had a lot of warm leads because I realized that I was a networker. Like, oh, that person knows that person. So if I talk to them, maybe they can get me to that person. Or I know that person, LinkedIn was just starting. You'd say, okay, I can talk to that person about that person. You just would and I would do like research ahead of time so that there was no cold calling. Every lead I wanted to have was like a warm lead. And I'll be honest with you, for salespeople today, Nick, there's almost no reason to cold call. Every call should be warm now. You should have some sort of touch point on every sales call you make now. I mean, this idea that you used to just open the phone book and make phone calls, right? People used to open the yellow pages and just make calls for leads. Like, you don't have to do that anymore. There's just so much opportunity to have that warm lead and not a cold call. So that was my biggest challenge.
Yeah, and I think people still misunderstand that. Just because you're calling somebody you don't know, doesn't mean it's a cold call. Because I had somebody sell me and call and say, I looked at your website, I see what you do. This is kind of a cold call, but my call is about your website. And I said to the person, it's not a cold call then, because you called something specifically curated for me. And you see a lot of bogus stuff like that on LinkedIn, for example, but there's really no reason for it to be a cold call. You ought to be able to come up with some unique identifier, some unique reason you called. And if you're that person just, in the warehouse dialing through the phone book, that's fine. But at mid and higher levels of sales, do a little bit of homework to find out, to give the person some knowledge or some comfort that you're calling them for a reason. Say their name, state the website, talk about what they do for a living in at least a sentence. So I know you have a clue. You're not just throwing bait in the middle of the ocean and hoping something swims by and catches it. So I think we both misuse the term cold call. And like you said, we really should be making warm calls, even if they started cold.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, there's so much you can do. You can also talk to them about their competition. If you know a business, some of their competition, you can research that. You want to provide value from the second you talk to somebody in ways that's going to help their business, not they're going to help you. So many salespeople call and like, how can I get them to buy my product? How can I get them to buy some airtime? Well, everybody's got airtime. Everybody's got similar products. You've got to get them to buy your empathy, the fact that you care about their business, the fact that you understand their pain points. It sounds very generic, but so many people don't do it. They product dump and they say, I can do this for you. I can do that for you. This is what TV will do for you. This is what a radio ad will do for you. It doesn't work because everybody's got that product. There's other people out there selling the same products. You got to separate yourself.
Yeah. Before we move on to your big break at a young age, which moved you cross country to California from Buffalo, New York, don't call. I guess I do mean you, Dennis Williams, but don't call and tell the person, hey, you're doing it wrong. Your website looks terrible. I really don't like your product. Here's what you should be doing. Because like you talk about, it's not complicated. That's some simple sociology or psychology. Leading with you're doing it wrong is a good way to get off on the wrong foot. I really like what you're doing. I have a couple suggestions for you. You know, I looked at your website. I looked at your product. I like what you're doing, but are you open to some suggestion of other ways to improve it? For example, the people have lost me on cold calls that should have been warm by leading with you're doing it wrong. I don't love that. So tell us about your big break. At a young age, you catch a break to be sales director or some title like that in Sacramento. You go from being an individual contributor in sales to having sales and management together. It's one thing to be an individual contributor and a whole other ballgame when you are responsible for other people meeting their goals. The sales term we use is carrying somebody else's number. Tell us about getting the sales, but also how building a sales team with individual contributors fits into your experience.
Yeah, so Buffalo is very provincial to me. I love that town still, but I really needed to see something else. And more than anything, I wanted my kids to see something else. So I'll just give you a quick background of the leap that I took to leave Buffalo and go to California, because it really was a challenge that I am very proud of now. And I can say this because not everybody would leave the situation I left in Buffalo with a daughter that was going into 8th grade and another daughter that was going into 5th grade, and a wife at the time that had a pretty good teaching job. But I realized that I just didn't want Buffalo, New York to be the only thing my kids ever knew. I knew that we could move back at some point. I also knew that I had no chance at promotion where I was. I was going to be an account executive for the rest of my life because managers didn't move and there was no upward mobility for me. So what I decided to do was Tegna was a great company. They had leadership opportunities and things that they got me in front of the right people. And I was fortunate enough to get in front of somebody who was running a sales department in Sacramento. And she needed at the time a business development manager, which was right up my alley. It was about bringing in new business and being creative and taking all the things that I had done as an account executive and influencing a sales team on business development. So that was my first job. That was the job I got right away before I became director of sales in Sacramento. I was business development manager. And that was the perfect job for me because I believe that like sales managers are best if they lead by example. If you're arm in arm on a sales call, if you're willing to, for lack of a better term, go to battle, you're willing to do everything that you're preaching, you're willing to do yourself. So that was easy for me from a leadership standpoint because I loved doing it. I loved being in front of clients. I loved coming up with solutions. I loved sitting in rooms with 7 different people and figuring out a branding strategy and how we're going to bring that branding strategy to life. So for me, moving from account executive to management in that particular situation was really, really simple because I really was just a quarterback, really a quarterback with a team around him. And I was going to distribute the ball the best I could. So that's really what I was able to do and learn how to lead right away. And I had a lot of good feedback. People saw that I brought things to the table creatively that they needed to close the deal. I can remember account executives coming into my office and they would be, what do you think about this client? How should we close this deal? What should we do? And it's just sort of the creative process of figuring out how to get that deal to the finish line. And I was always pretty good at that with the team. And then that's how you gain respect, right? I mean, I was never the leader that was like hammering down on people and all of that kind of stuff. People seem to want to work for people that, again, show empathy and care. And I was able to show that to my account executives. But the hardest part, the biggest challenge is trying to spend the time on the underachievers, the people that don't appreciate that. I mean, it wasn't all Pollyanna. It wasn't just, that everybody appreciated my style, right? So I had trouble learning how to push the right buttons for people that, whose buttons couldn't be pushed.
Yeah, it's almost like they say, making money. Anybody can make money in a good economy. Anybody can manage really productive, motivated employees, and you help them. But it's a good point you make. The harder part is the remedial.
Yeah, and knowing where to spend your time, right, too. I mean, I think this is a really important thing you learn over time. a lot of situations are you do spend too much time on the bottom 50% when you should be spending time on the top 50%, right? Because if you grow them, they're going to grow you. And the other people, sometimes as much as you want to help, you can't give them the help they need to get them to the finish line. But a lot of times too, you can navigate them in a different direction. A lot of people have been very successful. This wasn't for you, but here's what might be for you, right? Here's an opportunity. Here's an area that might work better for you. You're not cut out for this part. So you can still be a mentor without being a jerk and being like, I had a few people that I had to fire that knew they were going to get fired and were still my friends because I was transparent with the whole process of this isn't working out, and I have a couple come to mind that are literally still friends that I had to let go.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been a common theme on this podcast and interviewing employers and leaders is, how do you discipline your friends? How does it work? Because a lot of people some people say, don't do business with your friends. I don't agree with that. I think you're best to work with people you trust and people you know well, but it can be hard if things devolve. Or Troy Parrish, our last guest, talked about if a company gets bought out, for example, and there's going to be layoffs. But the secret weapon, or it's really not a secret, the way to handle that is enhanced human communication, especially if it's remedial, to set an edge to say, I'm with you, anything you need, but here's where you're deficient. Continue to work on that. The second conversation may be more difficult if it's about the same things. And the third conversation could be, we weren't able to meet these goals and I got to move you up, out, over, whatever it is. But I think communication is the key. In sales are hard. For example, Spotio.com is quoted as saying, sales is hard. Turnover is a lot higher than other industries. It's critical your organization has a clearly defined process for finding, interviewing, and hiring high-performance reps. Look at the top sales reps and make a list of what makes them good for that position and hire more of those people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. What the challenge is in the broadcast TV industry is that it's not sexy anymore. Nobody wants to work in that industry. So, I got out I know we'll get into this, but I got out about 4 years ago. And my challenge at the end was we just couldn't find young talent that wanted to be in that industry. There's just too many other things that people want to do and have the opportunity to do. And TV and radio and broadcast selling is not as sexy as it used to be. It's not as cool as it used to be. It's a lot of, people are aging out of the business and it's just so much harder to recruit than it used to be in that business. So there's some headwinds against that business for sure.
We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. The law firm of Scholes, Brick & Rogaski and partner Michael Rogaski are at the top of my list of go-to teammates. I have worked with their office for more than a decade on legal matters involving labor and human resource issues, contracts, savvy strategies to collect from that occasional naughty client, wills and trusts for my family, and even buying and selling a business. It's exactly true what their slogan says: big firm result, small firm service. Contact partner Michael Rogaski by visiting sbrlawsd.com. OM Incorporated is my go-to agency for digital marketing. I work with partners Andrew Thorne and Jennifer Wiles every day to market my business coaching practice. I get about half my business from the aggressive digital marketing strategy they design and run. OM developed NickWarnerConsulting.com and integrated a targeted digital marketing plan that matches me to high-quality clients. I'm also going to work with them on my 2023 rebrand campaign. Contact them at www.om-incorporated.com. So I want to talk about in building teams, and I actually have some rapid-fire questions for you because I want to just understand more of your experience and expose that to the listeners. But one of the things that I found really unique about you, and one of the things that lands you on this podcast, and frankly landed you doing some sales training, in some organizations I'm involved in, is I asked you one time, what is the most important thing to you in sales? And you said curiosity, which has been out there. And I understand that that's like a vogue term, but tell us how you think about curiosity and how do you use that in sales, Dennis?
One of the key things when we first started talking was, and this is my number one thing when I start with salespeople, is that you have to know the person you're sitting across from. Like that's the critical thing. So one of the first things I ever did was and they have all different names for this, but it's sort of disc training, right? And it's knowing the personality you're sitting across from. So many salespeople walk in, they've got their pitch, they do their pitch the same way. Here's what I'm selling, here's what I'm about, and it's all about you. Curiosity is, what is it about you that you need? What's going to help you sell more product? What's going to help you sell more cars, more heating and air systems, whatever it is? What's going to help you? And you realize those personality, and you talk to people about their personality. But the other thing you do is you really dig into what they're like. So you time the interview right. I mean, I can tell you times when I was dealing with a dominant personality, right? And a lot of times in the car industry, I'll just give you some anecdotal examples. In the car industry, the guys who run car dealerships are strong, dominant people. So they literally, if they give you 5 minutes, it's a lot. Like, they're running hard. So you better make that 5 minutes count. The other people, like, I could be sitting across from a Nick Warner, who's more interpersonal, and Nick's going to want to sit with you for a half hour, an hour, right? And I want to know about you and what makes you. You're going to be curious about me, and I'm going to be curious about you. That's going to be the type of personality. And you see that, and you want to react accordingly to that. So it's all about adjusting yourself to the personality you're across from. And there's training you can do for this. There's training you can do so you understand yourself, and then you understand the people that you're talking to. There's keys that you can pick up with people so that you know exactly how you need to cater your cadence, your timing, all of the things that you're doing when you're sitting across from somebody. And it's not being phony. It's not like being an actor. It's being respectful. Like, a person who's a strong dominant in a car dealership that, like, has 5 minutes for you, he gave you 5 minutes that he didn't want to give you. So you're being respectful by making that 5 minutes count and doing what you need to do in that 5 minutes. It's being respectful if somebody wants to talk to you for a half an hour and sit down and get to know you and what makes you tick. That's important to that person that's interpersonal. The person who wants the data, right? Give them the data. That's what they want. They don't want to sit and chit chat with you. They want data and facts, because that's how they run their brain. The person who wants all the information to bring back to their team, and they'll coalesce with their team and then come back to you with an answer. Respect that. I can't give you an answer today. I'm going to go back and talk to my team. Thank you for giving me all this information. That's another personality. So you've got those 4 key personalities that you're going to be up against, and you've got to know when and how to deal with them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the data up, because, like, for me, for example, when I'm selling or I'm presenting, I'm a very passionate person. And what I've noticed is, and you help point this out to me, and I've watched you point it out to others, and I've watched you in big meetings where I just see you do it and learn from you, which is, my way is not resonating with the person I'm talking to. And so I need to recognize that live. Ideally, I know coming in that I'm working with somebody who's more cerebral, which is not hard to do when it comes to me. That is, more cerebral. They're into the data. They want empiricals. They don't want to talk about how good this is going to feel, how excited the employees will be, how this is great for their channel partners. They want data, and they want proven facts. And so I'm trying to really recognize who am I talking to. Again, if I can figure out in advance and come totally prepared, but because that's not always possible to get a read on the person or even to know what the exact format is going to be. And I like your example of the car dealer, because we can all picture you walking in and they're super busy walking around the floor trying to sell cars to people like me for prices that are outrageous to start. So come with the whole toolbox. Be able to spin to whatever that person needs in that moment is part of it as well. Let's talk about a little bit about how you build your teams, Dennis. And some of this might be rapid fire, or some of it we might end up digging deeper into, but what are you staying away from, and what are you looking for when you're starting to build a sales team?
The line that I draw, so I used to ask people all the time if they played sports when they were younger. I always really thought it was, and it didn't have to just be sports, because I have a daughter who's 24, who's like the most competitive driven person, and she was a dancer. So I don't know if you qualify dancing. I mean, I count it as a sport because she spent, 30 hours a week practicing when she was a kid. So it's one of those things where I just want to know that they competed at some level in their life. I just feel like if you're going to be a salesperson, you have to want to win. You have to have that competitive drive and want to win. And I've never found a way around that. I've had people try to talk to me about it and try to talk around it. So I always really dug into finding out if they were competitive. I have one question that I would ask people that would that would rub some people the wrong way. I would ask them, if your nephew or niece, you were playing Candyland or Monopoly with them, and they were 7 years old, would you let them win? I would ask them that. And The answer's varied and there's no right or wrong answer, but I know in the back of my head, I wanted to say, hell no, I wouldn't let them win. I wanted to teach them what it was to win. That's what I really wanted to hear. And I heard a lot of different answers and I know there's different scenarios, but I really wanted to hear like I was with my kids. I never let my kids beat me at Monopoly and they turned out okay. There's this whole like participation trophy thing. And we've got to let everybody win. And I'm not in that camp. I'm old school.
Well, participation trophy in sales will land you in middle bottom and out the door. So I love this phrase, you have to want to win. I mean, what you're doing is you're teasing out competitive. What else?
Well, we already talked about the curiosity. I do think that you've got to have like a creative mind too. I think you have to be somebody who wants to tell a story, to weave a story, because I think people that do that are very good communicators. And I don't think you can be in sales and not be a good communicator. So you have to be somewhat of a good storyteller. So even if they're talking about how they grew up or something, I sort of would listen to the story and like, can you tell a story properly? I think that that's always a key component to a good salesperson because it makes them a good communicator. If you can tell your own story well, then you can tell other stories well, which means you're a good communicator, which means you can sell.
That's a great point. I would say get them talking.
Yeah, that's a great one. Get them talking, right?
So some of this is a question about big corporate, which I've worked for and around, but not in necessarily. So when you're looking for people, are you looking internally, externally? What is that dynamic? How are you talent scouting?
I think it's all over the board. The good thing we had with Tegna was we had a very good HR department that would give us some, they would be looking all the time because I think talent acquisition was the hardest. Probably the best people I've had over the years are people that start as interns and see the culture and then work their way up. So a lot of times, if you're looking for somebody that's younger, right, to come into your organization in their early 20s, I think it's important that you mentor them and get their feet wet as an intern or maybe a part-timer and see where their strengths are. I believe in like being able to mentor and evaluate people at a young age. And then the other thing that I would say is I actually found, and maybe this is a product of my background, being a history major and a journalist that got into sales, right? And a liberal arts background, is that I never cared what people's majors were. Like I've never cared like what you majored in college, what your background is. Maybe if you got a master's or something, that all matters, what you did in graduate school. But I never cared what your undergrad was. If you had a degree and you were smart, I always say this, Nick, I told my kids this when they were when my daughter wanted to be a dance major and my other daughter is poli-sci. I said, don't worry about it. The world just needs more smart people. Like that's the bottom line. The world just, so get an education, be smart and be able to pivot and be able to do all the things we just talked about, being competitive, being able to speak well. That has nothing to do with your major. That has nothing to do with what you do in undergrad. What it has to do with is what kind of person you become. So I looked for that. I looked for the human being and what they could be, not what they already were, what they studied. What can this person be? Where can they get to? And that's kind of how I evaluated talent.
I suspect you got there before big corporate. It's not really a story about Tegna or even, ABC 10. It's a story about big corporate in general. We're seeing it now, this broad movement away from the top universities with the top GPAs and the most unbelievable people resumes. There are so many smart people. In a book like Emotional Intelligence or Emotional Intelligence 2.0 documents really well how there's a lot of smart people that can apply the emotional intelligence to get to sales or to get to business. So I agree. I mean, if it's a technical job, obviously like a lawyer or an engineer or a doctor or aeronautical engineer, I would like you to have a specific degree toward that, especially the aeronautical engineer.
Or a surgeon. I'd rather a surgeon has.
I think that's a very fair point you make. I'm looking for, how'd you get through it? Did you work in school? What'd you take away? College is a grind. I mean, the bureaucracy, big school or small school is significant. There's a lot of hurdles to get through and people to deal with and classes and paperwork that will teach you real world skills. So yeah, I agree with that. I think you told us what your best employees have in common. What have your worst employees or most difficult teammates had in common?
Ego that they couldn't back up is probably it, right? Like big egos and then weren't delivering. I always say this is why I'll go back to the point about doing some of that the research things like a DISC program or something when you're hiring people, doing some of those tests that they hand out, like disc training or Myers-Briggs or any of those things. Why those are so important is because salespeople are really good at selling you on the job they're trying to get. And what I mean by that is, like, if I'm a showy salesperson, but behind the scenes, it may be all ego. I may not be a producer. So I'd say my biggest challenge was falling for the really like sharp talking, good looking potential salesperson. And then you realize on the back end, that was all just bloating ego.
Well, the other problem with that I look for is that person a lot of times is foreclosed to learning going forward because they know it all. And so, like, know it all, big ego that can back it up and is introspective and learning and spreading credit around fine. Big ego without the substance. And again, what I found in the big ego is they don't need to learn anymore. And that's really, really problematic. So yeah, that's helpful. Any more tips or things you look for? One of the folks we interviewed said, no brilliant jerks.
Oh, well, that's a really good one. You know, I've had people that have been really high performers, but they were also people that couldn't work in a team environment, right? Like that they were very, very difficult to deal with as a teammate. You know, it's sort of like that Antonio Brown, right? Like, how many chances are you going to give a guy like that that's just so difficult from a team perspective because he's such an individual?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, he's a star wide receiver from a whole bunch of teams who, you know, was probably the best physical talent on earth, and then brought in all of the descriptors and more that Dennis described from your worst employees. So I think for those who aren't sports fans, just know it was huge ego. Yeah. And actually he could deliver, but couldn't get along with his teammates, the media, the organization that employed him. So all that talent goes right out the window for personality.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sports analogies for that. So I think that's probably what I would do, and I tend to do that sometimes to bring up sports analogies. But it's the huge ego that can't play in a team environment. Should have been playing in an individual sport rather than a team sport because they just don't fit in that space.
Last question before we move on to some personal things, and then getting back on your feet, starting in small business, you know, recalibrating to sell in small business. Talk to us a little bit about big corporate. Again, it's not a story about Tegna. It's like more an organizational story. Was big corporate a drag, hindrance to you, or do they help you in your pursuit to sell, recruit, and retain? Did you have to sell around the big corporate shield, or were they helpful in that regard?
I always thought that they weren't creative enough, that we were always 5-10 years behind. I can give you a great example. 10 years before people were putting content marketing into like Facebook feeds, and Yahoo was starting it, and Google was putting editorial content that was sales related into news feeds, I kind of brought that to the corporate. I was like, this is happening. Like, you guys can say it's church and state and news and sales are separate, but you can't get out of the way of this. This is going to happen. And they're like, no, we can't do it. We can't do it. And there's still people in Tegna that will tell you that 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I was talking about this now, that it was coming. Like, you guys, we can either get on the train or not. And we wouldn't get on the train. We didn't get on the train until it was too late. We could have led that space. I mean, so I always thought that Tegna and Gannett, as great as they were, and this is a corporate problem, is that they live in the past. They want to look ahead. They want to, look into the future. They talk a good game, but they don't back it up. So I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, I'll tell you the Gannett story that I tell to this day is Gannett owned the USA Today. The USA Today was everywhere. Right? You couldn't go anywhere without seeing USA Today paper. So how did Yahoo News and you name it, Apple News, and all of these other news feeds that you have digitally become the New York Times, whatever? How did they become the standard bearer for where we get our news? The USA Today had a brand that, if they had made the digital pivot when they should own that space. Like, literally, Gannett could have owned the digital news space because they already had the paper brand, but they just were too late, right? They never got out of their own way. They were so focused on saving print, and these stories are everywhere, right? We could go to Blockbuster, but these are the kind of corporate stories where the people inside don't see where they don't have the Wayne Gretzky model. If you want to know a sports analogy, they don't know where the puck is going. Gretzky would always go not to where the puck is, he'd go to where it's going. And that's why he was the greatest hockey player of all time. They didn't know where the puck was going. So that's really the bottom line. And that's what got in my way. And then the other thing that happens is in corporate, Nick, is they promote you out of what you love. I was good at what I was doing, so I became a director of sales, and they were like, "We want our head salespeople to be on the street with our account executives, and we want them out there." It was impossible. You have 15 bosses and sheets of spreadsheets and budgets and all of this stuff. So you didn't have the ability to do what you were good at, which is being client facing, helping salespeople out in the field, all of those things. You get promoted into a desk job. And, again, Tegna would say, "We didn't want you sitting at your desk. We wanted you out in the field." Well, you can't have, 15 bosses and all these reports you have to get to them and say you wanted me out in the field with salespeople. So those are the issues that I ran into with corporate. And that's why we're talking here today at the time we're talking at, and I don't have to be in a corporate job anymore.
Yeah. Let's take a little sideways move and talk about personal life, because as much as we try to keep home life and work life separate, it's really not entirely possible. For example, and you were kind enough to share this with me in pre-production several years ago, you went through a divorce, and it also involved school-age kids. Just for context, Dennis, Review42.com reports approximately 40% of all marriages made in the U.S. will end in divorce or separation. In fact, I'm sure stress at work has at least something to do with this. The divorce rate in the U.S. is the 6th highest in the world. Tell us about resettling with your kids and finding your legs again at work.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't wish it on like my worst enemy. People say that all the time, divorce, right? Never expected to be there. The move to California certainly affected that. I have no regrets over it. I think that affected my ex-wife considerably. My kids wouldn't be the kids they are today had they not had that experience. So I'm grateful for it. They grew so much. They thank me today. They moved to California kicking and screaming, and both of them have thanked me and know that their life would be completely different. And I mean that because they just learned so much adaptability and just a million different things that I could bring up from the kids' perspective. So, but for me, it's a reset. You never expect it. I had, largely a great marriage for, 16 years, maybe 15, 16 years, and made it almost 20. But it's one of those things where you just have to do a reset. I've had to reinvent myself a bunch of times, and I had to reinvent myself again. And I can tell you that I am, a stronger and better person for it. It taught me the expression that I've introduced to you, which is, and a lot of different people that I love, which is every day is a bonus, and you've just got to start it. Yes. Right. Like you've got to wake up in the morning and say how you're going to get things done, not how you're not going to get things done. And people around me know I had some dark moments, but those dark moments teach you a lot, and they teach you who you are and how you can get to the other side of it. And from a work perspective, it greatly affected my work. It's probably why I started my own business. I don't think I would be sitting here today. I probably wouldn't be talking to you had it not been for the divorce. I wouldn't have had the freedom or the guts or the ability to step out and take the entrepreneur road that I took that late in my life. I mean, I was, 48 or 47 or something when I started this company with my business partner. So I think it makes you reset and do some things that you wouldn't do. And, I've taken chances that I wouldn't have taken that have turned out great. So that's what I would say. I would say it's not for everybody, but I certainly get it now. I used to be very judgy, Nick, about divorce. I was in a family that people just grinded it out. They just stayed and they stayed and they stayed no matter what. I think that generation that were our parents did whatever it took, right? They did whatever it took to stay in it. So when people didn't do that, I was like, oh, sort of the competitive thing. Like, would you do quit? Would you do give up? I don't look at it that way anymore. And for all the reasons I just said, I don't look at it as quitting anymore. I look at it as a reset and starting over, new chapter.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Reinventing yourself after personal difficulties is hard. I really like starting at yes and then going backward to go forward. Speaking of, so you're back on your feet, you're looking to start at yes, and you're moving from giant corporate to start your own marketing business. Tell us about things like concern for immediate revenue, identifying and choosing a partner, finding clients, figuring out your unique market value, even thoughts about, you mentioned travel and being in front of your client. Tell us about that switch from big corporate to small, successful, little engine that could.
Well, it's really scary, I will tell you. And I was very, very blessed and fortunate because somebody who had a similar background with me in the business that was ready to, start a new chapter as well. Sean Springman, He was in Denver, I was in Sacramento. We were in similar positions, and we just have a really good yin and yang, for lack of a better term. We both provide different things to the business, but we have very similar personalities in terms of drive and determination. The thing that we're having the hardest time with, Nick, and I know I've talked to you about this, and this is something I need a consultant on, is that we're having trouble hiring people because we have trouble finding people with our want to, like our desire, our competitiveness, our attention to detail, like our drive.
You said drive and determination. I don't know how to say it better than that.
Our drive and determination. Yeah. We are having a tough time doing that. So we're actually turning into, like I talked to you about, just trying to find and mentoring people to see if they have it. Doing what I said I did in corporate, which is, let's go a little younger, right? Let's go a little younger and see if we can find the diamonds in the rough in their early 20s that want to start on this journey with us. And that if we were in an office, that we would mentor them. This isn't a situation where we can mentor them in an office every day, but maybe we can mentor them in our own way by being more attentive and not expecting them to know everything, and basing it more on drive and determination and personality rather than experience. So that's a big factor for us now as we try to grow our company. But back to the beginning, man, it's tough. We had somebody tell us, take everything you can get, take every scrap of business you can get. Eventually you'll be able to pick your poison. But when you're starting up a business like this, a consulting marketing business, take every little scrap you can get. Each scrap is going to teach you something, and don't turn anything down. And that was a really good piece of advice, because we did that. And there's stuff now that we took at the beginning that we wouldn't take now, pieces of business. We kind of each found our lane. As you know, I'm really focused on the creative and storytelling side of the business, and Sean is really focused on the audience, finding that audience for that story. It's a simple way of putting it, but so we really found our footing. But it's a struggle. It's like anybody, starting a new business is difficult. But the joy for me is being able to work anywhere. I mean, it's cliche, Nick, but being able to open this computer and talk to you and be in St. John or, Las Vegas next week, where I'm going to be. And, I'm up in the Northeast with my family a lot, back in California 4 or 5 times a year. I mean, I can't put a price tag on that. What's that worth for me every year? Is that worth 100,000? Is that worth 200,000? What is that worth if I was still stuck in a corporate job with 3 or 4 weeks of vacation a year? I cannot put a price tag on that. It's just incredible.
We appreciate your time. If you like what you've heard so far, do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and share with your friends. We'll be right back. Kathy Olson at Ships and Trips makes travel planning so easy. She says she's a travel agent, but I experience her more like a travel concierge. Kathy has helped my family and friends plan countless trips over the years. She always puts in the extra effort, even calling local shops to find us off the beaten path snowmobile tours, local accommodations, or even to call in advance to make sure our rooms are correct. We love working with Kathy. Call her at 209-518-1625 or email Kathy with a C at shipsandtrips.com. The video 3 Bridges Consulting produced for nickwarnerconsulting.com has increased my sales and the quality of the leads I get. 3 Bridges believes defining and then telling a company's story to the right audience is the most important step in a successful marketing plan. It's not uncommon for a new client to tell me the video on my website was the reason they called me. These guys really know how to use video to help you sell your services. Contact Dennis Williams or Sean Springman by visiting www.3bridgesconsulting.co. Well, there's 2 things about the travel. There's one that it feeds your soul, but also it's smart business. And if you are a client of mine and you're doing your whole job behind your desk, you're going to hear me say things like, I really want you to get out and see people. And then you're going to find out I was on a plane and I saw 11 people in 2 days and was home. It's good business too, correct?
Oh, yeah. So it's funny that you say that, because this week we did a project in Atlanta, and I was in one of those startup incubator shared office spaces, right, with all of these different startup businesses. And we were working with one of the startups on a video project. And I thought, God, if I was here every day, I would probably get that company to do a video project. I'd probably get that company. Like, I was in this incubation, like, shared office space. So I immediately came back and looking for one here in South Florida. So I was at this place called Venture X. It's a shared office space in West Palm Beach. I can go up there 2 or 3 times a week. few $100 a month, I can get in this office space and meet a ton of people. Like we just said, I'm not going to sit here at this desk in my home office and cold call. I'd rather be out there in front of people. The more time you're in front of people and traveling, to your point, or even that, like I would recommend what I just said, because I'm going to do this and I might have multiple shared office spaces, because that's the beauty of the world right now. I mean, they have these incredible incubate. If you're in a good city, they have these incredible spaces now where they said there's 1,000 different companies in this Venture X place in West Palm Beach, and they have happy hours and they have social events and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me to go up there and join and test the waters at a place like that and see what kind of content and marketing help they need. So, that's the point too, the flexibility to do things like that.
Yeah, that's you teaching me something. I wasn't aware. I mean, I knew there were shared workspaces, but I never thought about, it's not uncommon for me to go to a city. Like I'm going to make a Southern California swing in a couple of weeks, and I'm literally going to see 10 people in 2.5 days. And so then I'll be moving around, but I never thought about posting up in a city, because in most of these cities I have, multiple clients or people I want to see. For example, that's a really interesting notion. I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, Dennis, I want to hear what you're excited about. And just for the listeners, we had a pre-production call, as per normal. And I told Dennis at some point, I'll ask you what you're excited about. And he gave me a great foreshadowing, because he's really excited about video to tell your business's story. So I didn't mean to jump out in front of you, but I'd love to hear with that set up, what you're excited about.
I love the niche we've found. So I've been able to take my journalism background and create videos for companies that really dig in and tell their story. And what I love about it is that I really do feel like it's a skill to be able to sit down with a business owner, their clients, their employees, and talk to them in a very well lit, professional looking manner and dig into their story. So it's basically taking all of that storytelling stuff that we've talked about for the last 45 minutes and putting it into this corporate world. And I will tell you, I'm going to have a testimonial from this company I worked with in Atlanta that says this to me, and I'm going to paraphrase. She goes, "Boy, when you put this in front of me, I thought it was really, really expensive. I thought, my gosh, that's a big number for us. But you created content for us from like the content library and the video that's going to be living on their website. It's going to last us for 12 to 18 months to 2 years. So if I take that, and I'll just throw a number out. If I say, am I willing to spend $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month on video or on our content for the next year, would I be willing to spend that? And the answer should be yes, because never has content and video been more important to businesses. And I challenge anybody to name me a business that it wouldn't be important for than it is today. And if you can tell your story, you have a really good opportunity to set yourself apart from the competition and to shorten the sales cycle. I mean, you and I have discussed this, right? If people can be introduced to you on your website or through social media by hearing from you, you've taken one step right out of the process. And then that call is not cold, it's warm at that point. That customer is going to be a warm customer because they already know you.
Yeah, you did the video for my website, and I was reticent to spend the money, but I did because I trust you, frankly, and I didn't understand how it was going to work. And the way it worked for me, and this is different than what I see in other videos, which I'm not in favor of. The videos that I don't like, that I wouldn't spend money on, are the videos that show, like in a service business, people walking into a fancy conference room and like dynamic music and they're throwing their jacket over their shoulder. Like, that's great. And that shows it's fancy. But where I'm getting business, and I think others would get business, is I was interviewed on camera. What does your ideal client look like? What is the first session? What does winning look like to you? And so I have people call me, not every day, but enough people where I realize, oh, this is powerful. And they say, your video was really helpful. And I called you because I really understand what you do. And so as much narrative as you may have, the narrative is helpful too. The video is next level for people. And it's not a super long video. At least mine isn't. I don't think it's 3 minutes. But it tells people what we do. And by the time they call, they're in a better posture. They understand. For me, it's cut down on what I'll call bait fish. Like, I'm not getting a bunch of junk calls. The leads that are coming in are high quality because the video gets them in posture to understand how we'd serve them and who should call me in this case.
Well, and in your case too, I think a lot of people, if they've not done this, they feel like they have to like script things and they have to have it all prepared. But the beauty of the way we do this is none of that happens. It's all organic. It's all interview style. It's all sit down. We edit it together. So we take the best stuff So it's one of those things where you don't have to script, or you're going to want to think about it. You're going to want to know what the questions are and have some thoughts formulated in your head, but it's very, very natural. I like to say, would you like to have a CBS Sunday Morning or a 60 Minutes piece on your website about your business? That's what we try to produce. That's the quality we try to go with. That's the look and feel we want to go with. So that's really what I'm super excited about it. I literally can't wait to do the next one. I'm always like, what's our next project? Almost all my calls around now are about content and content creation and what is your story? Like that's got me very, very excited.
This is as close as I'll come to like blatantly selling myself. I mean, at some point I talk about Nick Warner Consulting. I think at the end of this podcast, go to my website, nickwarnerconsulting.com, click on the video, and that will show you what Dennis is talking about. It's indisputable evidence that it just adds another dimension. So I guess I'm excited about it too. Hey, Dennis, where can we find you? Where can our listeners find you?
Threebridgesconsulting.co is our website, threebridgesconsulting.co. We just are redoing the site now, so it's got a really nice look and feel to it. So we're very excited about, especially our new video page. One of the things we had to do as a new business, and we always tell businesses this ourselves, is you got to refresh that site and that brand every few years because things change. And we're really leading with this content in this video, and you'll see that when you visit our site. And so that's the main place to reach us is our website.
Yeah, I think rebrand's important too. Again, it's a little bit parochial for me to say this, but I'm going to do a rebrand. I'll be roughly 2 years in at the end of this calendar year. So on or around January 15th, I want to retell my story. I'm not coming out of another business into this business now. I'm a well-established, at least on the metrics, very successful business coach and professional development coach, and I want to tell the story different. And I can't imagine a scenario where I'm not using live testimony from people that are willing to share their story of working with me. So I'm really excited about rebrand, and I'm really excited about the use of video in that rebrand because I asked you what I should be excited about. I say sarcastically,
right?
I'm excited about some of the same things. I'm excited to now tell you what I've learned from you and to kind of review the conversation we've had in closing. This is my favorite part of the show. And as I've said before, and if you think it's a joke, I promise you it's not. I have notes all over my desk of smart things you've said. Curious, creative, and competitive. If you just said that, I could have been done. Like, that's who I'm looking to work with. Curious, creative, and competitive. Your friends don't just give you money. I like working with my friends, but they don't just give me money, and I don't just take their money. You got to earn it, and you got to earn it every month. But I would love to do business with people that I know, but your friends don't just give you money. This notion of cold calling turning into warm calling and warm leads, I think is really important, and it's actionable. Those of you who are making cold calls, spend just a minute on their website. Just understand their business a little bit and warm it up a tad. I promise you, because I'm your target audience, I will respond to more if you tailor it to me, even just a little bit. It'll catch my attention. Leading by example and practicing what you preach has been a central theme of these calls in leadership and management. I call it modeling. But Troy Parrish on our last show said you shouldn't ask people to make 200 cold calls if you've never done it. You shouldn't ask people to make these presentations if you've never done it. So leading by example and practicing what you preach certainly piqued my attention. The lane that you filled as a manager, as a sales manager at Tegna, is interesting to me. And I mentioned before that I think managers at times, especially in big corporate, when they get assigned, they get taken out of, as you mentioned, what they're passionate and great at and put onto other teams to. Usually it's justified by, we want to expand your vision of this big company, so we're going to put you on other teams. And they end up overlaying their team like a wet blanket. And so we've talked before on the podcast about the job of the manager to clear the bureaucracy, to get the budget, to provide the tools. But you did it a different way. My guess is you did that as well. But what you said is where you were really helpful is in the creative, in getting across the finish line. Instead, we're coming to you saying, hey, boss, here's where we are. Here's the situation. What do you think? And your value add was helping them get it across the finish line with creative, not with being a lead blocker, but with creative. Knowing the person you're talking to, like I can't say this enough ways in the personal and the professional. You said it best, but know the person you're talking to. Are they rah-rah? Are they cultural? Do they need data? Do they have 5 minutes or an hour? All these things. Really active listening and really active watching. And then you adjust your game. You're the one trying to sell. You adjust your game. You don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole. So I really like that a lot. When I asked you, what are you looking for? You said a number of different ways and got there a number of different ways. Competitive. You have to want to win. You have to want to win. If you've ever worked with me, you know I want to win. I want to treat people well, and but you gotta want to win. And so I love that. I'm gonna actually file that away and put it in the top of my mind. A colleague of mine the other day used the word hungry. He said, this person on my team's just not hungry, and it lit me up. The way you have to want to win lights me up. Mentor your young people. Be aware of big egos, period. Big corporate living in the past, not quick enough. I think saying we can't and we won't are dramatically different things, because there were things in big corporate they could have done, they just didn't do. And you mentioned Blockbuster, I'll put BlackBerry in there, Sears in there, and then promoting people out of what they love is a flaw. And I see it in big public agencies, and you're pointing it out in private agencies as well.
Yeah, thank you. You did a great job with that. I mean, one of the things that makes you so good at doing this podcast, Nick, just to put a bow on it, is that you're such a good listener. And that's why I would add that. Like, when you're a broadcast journalist, you're a really good talker. So I've tried, one thing I've learned from you is, and I have to really focus on this, is how to be a better listener. You're exceptional at it. I always am striving to be better at it, because that's part of being curious, is really listening. And I feel like I'm good at it, but you're exceptional at it. And that's one of the things that I strive to be better at. And I think people can really take from this as well, is that's a real strength in any business, is to listen to your people, whatever level they're at, hear them.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. You know what fuels that? The active listening is a little bit of caring, a lot of bit of caring. I actually really care. And so I really listen because I really want to add value. The way you reinvented yourself after your personal difficulties and started to focus on starting at yes. And then I would just add, sometimes you have to go backward to go forward. It happens in personal life, and it certainly happens in business as well. Choosing a like-minded partner, you talked again about drive and determination, and then mixing it with maybe a different demographic. I like your notion as a business leader of having different people, age demographics on your team, socioeconomic, racial, and even religious. You get so much more flavor and so much better input, but then your attention, which is so important to mentoring your young people, really, really important. And then get out and about. Just please get out and about. Do not get stuck behind your desk. Just because you can do your job all on video does not mean you should. And if you're going to listen to anybody, listen to me and Dennis. Get out and about and see your clients. It's where the richness of relationship is, but also the richness of information that allows you to succeed with them together. Dennis, any closing comments before we close it up?
I will piggyback on that. I think that's why you and I are sitting here right now, is because we took advantage of our first time together, like getting out in front of people. The listeners should know our first relationship was, I hired Nick first, right? I was in big corporate, and we hired Nick's lobbying firm to help us get in front of people. And it was all about connections and people and friendships and networking and all of those things that are sales 101. So, and we've taken that obviously steps further, but I would just kind of leave your listeners with that. It really is. That's a really good last point to leave on, is it's really about getting out there in front of people. I think a lot of people right now are stuck because they're used to this, right? We went through 2.5 years where everything's comfortable. In fact, it drives me nuts to see people still Zooming on newscasts. I'm a news junkie, right? And I'm watching them still be lazy and interview people by a Zoom on a local newscast. And I'm saying, get your camera in front of that person with a microphone. Like, you don't need to be Zooming. It's made people lazy. And I'm not saying there's not a time for it, but if it can be done in person, it should be done in person. We couldn't do this because we're 3,000 miles apart, but if we could have, we would have done this in person, right? So I think that's the best point is to leave everybody with that fact that you want to connect with people, and connecting with people is not Zoom, it's in person.
Yeah, well said. Dennis Williams, thank you so much for being our guest. You did a great job. You taught me and our listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us next month on Together at the Top.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much for your time. Together at the Top thrives off listeners like you. To stay connected, follow our socials in the show notes and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll be releasing our show on the last Tuesday of every month. See you next time. At Nick Warner Consulting, we exist to coach and consult motivated professionals. I meet with you on Zoom in focused 90-minute sessions, working toward your goals and developing next-level business skill sets. My job is to add value to your organization and your career. To learn more, visit www.nickwarnerconsulting.com or call me directly at 916-765-3576.